They called it the future of fraud detection. Internally, we just called it Sentinel. But I knew deep down that this system was more than a corporate buzzword. It was my brainchild, the product of hundreds of late nights, untouched dinners, and endless loops of testing and retraining. I had written the first lines of code for it during the pandemic, sitting on my tiny apartment floor, drinking stale coffee and dreaming of building something that could actually matter. And somehow, I did. My name is Maya, and until a few months ago, I was a senior data analyst at Silverline Insurance, one of the largest and most outdated insurance firms in the Midwest. I was one of the few women and the only black woman in the company's core tech team. That meant I had to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. But I didn't care. I didn't come there to be liked. I came to build. Sentinel started as a side project, a tool I created to flag suspicious claims based on pattern analysis and cross-validation against historical payout behavior. It caught things humans couldn't. Within 3 months of internal testing, it had already prevented over $2 million in fraudulent payouts. My manager praised me behind closed doors, but said the credit would go to the team. I didn't argue. I was used to playing the long game. Then came Thomas Kane. The board called it a bold move, hiring an outside CEO from Silicon Valley with a reputation for aggressive modernization. What they really meant was that he fired fast, cut deeper, and didn't give a damn about who got caught in the crossfire. He walked into the office like he owned the place, wore a different designer suit every day, and smiled like a man who never heard the word no. During his first all-hands meeting, Thomas told us, "We're building a future where efficiency trumps tradition, and loyalty means late nights." Everyone clapped. I didn't. That was the first time he looked at me. He started restructuring immediately. Middle management was gutted. HR was replaced with a new team loyal only to him. And tech? He wanted full control. One morning, I was asked to move all my work, including Sentinel's codebase, onto the company's internal servers. For security, they said, but I knew better. That wasn't about security, it was about ownership. I had used my personal laptop to build Sentinel. I had documented every iteration, every training log, every algorithmic pivot. Most of it I wrote on weekends, off the clock. It was mine. But now they wanted it to become Silverline property. They wanted me to hand it over, without recognition, without compensation. When I raised concerns to my manager, he told me, "Don't make this a big deal, Maya. This is how things work in big companies." I stared at him, wondering how long he'd been telling himself that to sleep at night. Still, I didn't argue. I played along, smiled in meetings, nodded when asked about timelines. But I never uploaded the full code, just fragments, just enough to keep them distracted. At night, I backed up everything. I logged timestamps. I added encryption. I renamed functions so no one could trace them back easily. Because I knew. I knew the storm was coming. I just didn't know how fast it would hit. Thomas didn't waste time. Within a week of his arrival, he sent out a survey titled Team Alignment and Productivity Metrics. It looked innocent enough, but anyone with half a brain could see what it really was, a loyalty test. Questions like, would you be willing to work outside business hours to ensure project success? Or, how committed are you to Silverline's long-term vision, even when it requires personal sacrifice? Were a dead giveaway. I clicked prefer not to answer on everyone. That's when the invitations started disappearing from my calendar. Meetings I was supposed to be part of suddenly moved without notice. Files I needed access to were locked. A few junior devs stopped talking to me altogether. One even avoided eye contact in the elevator. I wasn't paranoid, I was being isolated strategically, and it wasn't subtle. Then came the collaboration request. A forced assignment, really. I was told I'd be working with a newly formed AI transition task force, comprised mostly of people who didn't understand the difference between a neural net and a spreadsheet. My job? Migrate Sentinel into the company's proprietary infrastructure, ensuring full compatibility and compliance. And I asked for clarification on what that meant. The email I got back was one line. All code must be centralized and standardized under company protocols. No exceptions. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to absorb it, strip away my fingerprints, turn my creation into something faceless and corporate. But worse, they wanted to erase the fact that it was ever mine to begin with. I pushed back. I requested a legal review of the transfer process. HR responded with a polite but firm message. Ownership of intellectual property developed during tenure at Silverline is governed by the employee agreement. I'd read that agreement a dozen times. Sentinel didn't qualify. I'd built its foundation on my own time, on my own machine, with no prior directive or funding from the company. It was mine. Still, they kept pressuring. A week later, I was called into a meeting with Thomas himself. He was seated in the center of a glass-walled conference room, flanked by two executives I'd never seen before. "Maya," he said, not even standing, "this is a pivotal moment for Silverline. You're a talented developer. We want you on board as we take Sentinel to the next level." I nodded cautiously. "I'm happy to help as long as my contributions are fairly recognized and legally protected." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, we're all on the same team here. But let me be blunt, if you're not aligned with the mission, there's no place for solo players in this company." I felt the trap closing. That wasn't a negotiation. That was a warning. 2 days later, during a Friday afternoon stand-up, Thomas publicly accused me of being resistant to integration. He said that certain individuals were putting personal ego ahead of company progress. Everyone knew who he meant. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. That evening, HR called me in. A woman I'd never met handed me a thick envelope. "Effective immediately," she said. "Termination due to failure to comply with corporate directives." She didn't even look up. I left the office in silence. No one said goodbye. No one made eye contact. Just like that, I was out. Years of loyalty, results, and innovation wiped away because I refused to give away my work for free. I walked home under the pale glow of streetlights, clutching the envelope with both hands. I wasn't sad, not really. I was angry, and under that anger was something stronger, determination. If they thought they could steal from me and bury me quietly, they had no idea what I was capable of. The next morning, the reality hit me like a cold slap to the face. I didn't have a job. I didn't have severance. I didn't even have a reference letter. Just a generic termination notice and a signed NDA I had refused to complete. I stared at the envelope, still on my kitchen table, and felt my chest tighten. This was how they wanted to end it, quick, quiet, clean. Like I'd never been there, like I hadn't spent 3 years building something from nothing. I opened my laptop and saw the first sign of what was to come. My company email was already deactivated. I tried logging into the internal server. Access denied. I checked LinkedIn. I was still listed as an employee at Silverline. But within hours, that would change. I removed the job title myself. I didn't want my name attached to them anymore. An hour later, I got a call from a blocked number I didn't pick up. The voicemail was from HR, reminding me to return my badge, my work laptop, and any company-owned materials. They didn't mention Sentinel, not directly, but I knew what they were really after. In the fine print of the letter they'd handed me the day before, they included a clause. All tools, frameworks, and associated IP developed during the course of employment at Silverline must be surrendered immediately. I read that line again and again, bile rising in my throat. They were trying to claim Sentinel as theirs. They wanted my code, my vision, my work, and they wanted it without paying a cent, without even acknowledging that I had created it. I felt dizzy. Betrayal pulsed through every inch of me. I opened my drive and stared at the folders I had protected, encrypted, backed up, Sentinel V1, Sentinel logs, Sentinel notes, all mine. I knew I had every right to it. I had started building it long before Silverline even greenlit the idea. I had the timestamps, the commits, the Git history. But suddenly, I wasn't sure that was enough. I called Lisa, an old friend from college who'd gone into IP law. I forwarded the letter, the emails, my employment contract. She called me back within 20 minutes. "Do not sign anything," she said firmly. Not a single word. They're bluffing. If they push it, we'll fight back. I breathed out for the first time in hours. Her confidence gave me the anchor I needed, but even so, I couldn't shake the chill under my skin. I knew how companies like Silverline worked. They had money, lawyers, and connections. They could bury people like me in legal mess until we gave up. That night, I lay awake for hours in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. Rage simmered just beneath the surface. I thought about how Thomas had smirked when he called me a solo player, how no one, not even the people I mentored, had spoken up when I was fired. I had given so much, and in the end, they treated me like I was disposable. But then another thought crept in. If I'm really disposable, why are they still trying to take what I built? That's when the plan started forming. The next day, I shut down all my social media, locked down my online presence. I deleted the company from my LinkedIn profile, changed my location, and set everything to private. I didn't want anyone knowing where I was or what I was doing. I wasn't going to sit around and hope they forgot about me. I was going to vanish. And then I would rebuild. I used my savings to register a new LLC, Halcyon Analytics. Just a name, just a shell for now. But it was mine. I rented a tiny desk at a co-working space a few blocks from my apartment. The space was quiet, nothing fancy, but it had fast Wi-Fi and good coffee. I brought in my personal laptop, connected my hard drive, and opened Sentinel. Only it wouldn't be Sentinel anymore. I started from scratch. A new name, a new vision, a new architecture that would make the old one look like a prototype. I called it Vesper, short for Verification System for Pattern Recognition. But it was more than just a name. It was my answer to every insult, every stolen credit, every time someone had said I was just support. Minds. Every line of code I wrote was a declaration, a refusal to be erased. I documented everything meticulously, dates, times, process notes, even voice memos to track my logic. Lisa helped me file a provisional patent application within the week. I cut expenses, let go of everything unnecessary. No fancy dinners, no streaming subscriptions, no distractions. Just code and coffee and the quiet hum of focus. The loneliness was brutal. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the way Thomas had looked at me in that conference room, as if I had no power. I reminded myself of the silence from my colleagues when I was humiliated. That silence fueled me. Weeks passed. No contact, no emails, no calls. It was like I had been erased from their world. But I wasn't disappearing. I was just getting ready, because they thought I'd walk away, but I wasn't walking. I was building. And when I returned, they wouldn't see me coming. 3 weeks into rebuilding Vesper, the silence broke. It started with a vague message from an unknown number. The demo failed. They're scrambling. No name, no context. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who they were. I imagined Thomas pacing inside Silverline's pristine conference room, demanding answers while the system they tried to steal from me refused to cooperate. Of course it failed. The version I left behind was incomplete, intentionally. It was never meant to function without the missing layers I held back. Layers only, I understood. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the snow fall through the narrow window of the co-working space I now called my office. I didn't respond to the message. I didn't need to. The cracks were starting to show. A few days later, a polite email arrived in my inbox from Thomas. No subject line, just, "Hope you're doing well, let's talk." I read it once, then again before clicking delete. No reply, no reaction. I wasn't interested in vague pleasantries or performative apologies. He had made his position clear the day he fired me in front of a room full of people. Now he wanted to pretend we were on equal footing? No thanks. Instead, I focused on tightening Vesper's infrastructure. I refined the fraud detection models, optimized the response times, and layered in a transparency protocol, something Sentinel had lacked. I didn't want just a better version of the old system. I wanted something unignorable, something bulletproof. Then came the legal shot. An official-looking envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a cease and desist letter except this time it wasn't from me. It was from Silverline's legal department, accusing me of IP theft, breach of contract, and misuse of proprietary data. I laughed out loud. It was bold, desperate, and completely expected, but I was ready. Lisa, my attorney, was livid. They're bluffing, but they're hoping the lawsuit will scare you into handing it all over. Instead, we filed our own cease and desist, this time with a full dossier of evidence: emails, code logs, Git histories, time-stamped notes, even the original Slack messages where I outlined the early framework months before Silverline ever approved the project. But I wasn't done. But Lisa helped me draft a second document, an open legal memo clarifying the timeline of development and the distinction between company property and personal innovation. We sent copies to Silverline's board of directors. No press yet, no drama, just pressure. Quiet, calculated pressure. And it worked. Rumors started leaking almost immediately. A friend still inside the company sent me screenshots from internal chats. Why is the demo delayed again? Thomas said it's a minor glitch. But didn't Maya build that whole thing? Doubt was spreading. Employees were questioning the narrative. Investors were asking for updates. The timeline wasn't adding up, and Thomas was running out of excuses. And then, late one night, another email arrived, this time from a different domain. A venture-backed insurtech startup, smaller but fast-growing, had heard whispers about what I was building. They wanted to see Vesper, not just the pitch, a real demo. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed to a video call. That weekend, I walked them through the core engine, masking just enough of the architecture to protect my IP. They were impressed, more than impressed. They asked how soon I could deliver a working version, what kind of support I'd need, and what it would take to bring Vesper to market. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar: momentum. Silverline might have fired me, they might have tried to erase me, but they had forgotten one critical truth. I didn't need their platform. I was building my own. By the end of that week, the buzz around Vesper had started to ripple through the industry. The startup I demoed for, Atlas Risk Systems, moved quickly. They drafted a preliminary agreement offering seed funding, technical support, and full autonomy over development. They didn't want to own Vesper. They wanted to partner. It was everything Silverline refused to do. I signed the contract the next morning, hands trembling slightly as I typed my name. Just like that, Vesper had a future, and I had a team. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't post on LinkedIn or send out emails. I had learned the value of silence. But not everyone stayed quiet. Carla reached out, a text, short and out of nowhere. "You need to see something." Attached was a file, a voice memo recorded during a closed-door meeting at Silverline. I hesitated before pressing play. Thomas's voice came through, clear and smug. "She won't do anything. She's just a developer. No one's going to believe she built the whole system. We'll slap a new logo on it, change a few modules, and call it proprietary." Laughter followed, then another voice. "What about the investors?" Thomas again. "We'll fake the demo if we have to. Smoke and mirrors." I sat frozen, the words echoing in my chest. It wasn't just arrogance, it was fraud, deliberate, calculated fraud, and now I had proof. Lisa and I reviewed everything: audio files, email threads Carla forwarded later, screenshots of internal memos. They were planning to deceive stakeholders using pieces of my code, still poorly reverse-engineered from the skeleton I left behind. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "They're not just stealing now. They're lying to investors. If this goes public, they're done." But I didn't go to the press. Not yet. Instead, I wrote a medium-length exposé titled "The Work They Tried to Erase." I didn't mention names, not directly, but I walked readers through the story, how I built a system to stop fraud, only to be targeted by it from within. I included timelines, anonymized quotes, and reflections on what it feels like to watch your own creation be claimed by someone else. I kept it professional, personal, and undeniable. Within hours, the article spread like wildfire. Tech bloggers reposted it. Industry veterans commented with support. Female engineers messaged me saying they saw themselves in my story. People asked questions, hard questions. Why would a company fire their lead developer days before a major rollout? Where is the original system now? Who actually built it? Silverline couldn't control the narrative anymore. The next day, someone leaked the memo Thomas had drafted to Silverline's board, a plan to shift blame to the legacy dev team, downplay Vesper's significance, and claim the new internal tool was independently built. But the timestamps didn't lie, and neither did the signatures on early architecture documents, with my name in black ink. A well-known tech journalist reached out to me for comment. I gave her everything on the record. 2 days later, the article dropped, From Silence to Spotlight, How One Developer Exposed a Corporate Cover-Up. The fallout was immediate. Investors started pulling back. Partners canceled meetings. Silverline's board announced an internal review. And Thomas? He went dark. No statements, no denials, just silence. Meanwhile, Atlas pushed forward. They brought on 2 machine learning engineers to work under my direction. We rented a small office in downtown Chicago. Nothing fancy, just 4 desks, a whiteboard, and a fridge full of energy drinks. But it was mine. It was real. And as we ran our first integrated test on Vesper's fraud engine and saw the results come back clean and accurate, I realized something. They thought they could bury me in silence. But I had found my voice, and now the whole world was listening. The wave of consequences that hit Silverline was swift and brutal. Within a week of the expose going live, 3 major investors publicly withdrew their support. Their statements were curt, citing ethical concerns and misalignment of values. Industry forums lit up with speculation, and Silverline's stock dipped for the first time in over a year. For a company built on stability and reputation, the damage wasn't just financial, it was existential. Inside sources started leaking more. I received anonymous tips, screenshots of emails, Slack messages, meeting transcripts. One in particular stood out. It was from a board member demanding clarity. Why did we let go of the architect of the system we're now claiming as ours? Another email from legal warned Thomas that continuing with the demo could be considered investor fraud. The pressure was building. Then came the tipping point. Silverline held a scheduled shareholder briefing meant to calm the storm, but instead of presenting a stable rollout plan, Thomas was grilled for nearly an hour. A transcript of the meeting made its way to me. He had no real answers, no functioning demo, no proof that Vesper, or any part of the AI framework, was developed internally. He fumbled, blamed the dev team, blamed shifting deadlines, even hinted that certain employees had sabotaged the project before leaving, but the board wasn't buying it. That same evening, a headline spread like wildfire across every major business site. Silverline CEO ousted amid AI scandal. Thomas Kane was officially removed as CEO, effective immediately. The company called it a strategic redirection. But everyone knew what it really was, a final act of damage control. They had backed the wrong man, and now they were paying the price. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Recruiters, journalists, old colleagues. Some congratulating me, some apologizing, and some, like Jordan, the junior dev who had once avoided eye contact when I was fired, finally reaching out. His message was short. I froze. I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do now, please let me. I stared at his words for a long time. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore it. He hadn't stood up when I needed him most. But another part of me, the one building something bigger than revenge, felt the weight of that silence lift, just a little. I didn't reply, not yet, but I didn't delete the message either. At Atlas, everything was moving fast. Vesper was now in beta testing with 3 pilot clients. The results were promising: accurate fraud detection, reduced manual review times, and glowing early feedback. We filed for a full patent, locking in legal protection across key markets. Lisa handled everything with precision, building a fortress around the code that once nearly cost me everything. And still, Silverline tried to regain control. One morning I received a formal letter from their new interim CEO. It was dressed in polite language, full of compliments and looking forward to reconciliation. They offered me a settlement, a generous one. High six figures plus a full retraction of their claims if I agreed to sign an NDA and walk away from the public narrative. I smiled as I read it. It wasn't an apology, it was a bribe. I forwarded the letter to Lisa, then to the same journalist who had covered the story before. The next article went viral instantly. Fired developer offered hush money after corporate scandal. The public response was overwhelming. I wasn't just the underdog anymore, I had become a symbol. Proof that integrity, resilience, and quiet defiance could win. And as I stood in our office that night, watching my team troubleshoot the latest build of Vesper, I realized I hadn't just survived Silverline, I had outgrown them. A month later, we closed our first international licensing deal. Vesper would soon be deployed across 3 major insurance networks in Europe. The contract was worth more than my entire yearly salary at Silverline, times 10. But beyond the money, it was validation. Not just of the technology, but of every sleepless night, every moment I doubted myself, every time I thought maybe they'd succeeded in breaking me. They hadn't. I had taken everything they tried to use against me and built something stronger with it. We moved into a new space, bright, open, filled with whiteboards and natural light. Our team had grown too, each person hired not because of their pedigree, but because they believed in what we were building. Jordan joined eventually, after weeks of honest conversations and accountability. He came in humble, eager to learn, and more importantly, ready to do better. I gave him a chance, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I believed in redemption. The tension faded with time. What replaced it was something better. Trust born from shared purpose, not fear. Then, the final email came, from Thomas. No letterhead this time, no legal tone, just a message filled with regret. He blamed pressure, the board, timing, his own ego, said I was the most talented person he'd ever worked with, said he hoped one day I'd understand. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need a final chapter. I archived the email and moved on. Last week, I gave a keynote at a global AI summit in Toronto. I walked out onto the stage to a packed auditorium and flashing cameras. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I told the story, not of revenge, but of resilience, of how a refusal to work unpaid overtime led me to build something entirely mine. I spoke of betrayal, of silence, of the power of standing your ground when everything else is pushing you down. And that's the message I carry forward. You don't have to scream to be powerful. You don't have to burn bridges to win, but you must protect what you build, keep the receipts, own your work, and never let someone convince you that your value depends on staying quiet. Because sometimes the loudest message you'll ever send is simply surviving and thriving without them.
They didn't expect me to say yes, not because I wasn't qualified, God knows I was, but because the project had chewed through 3 senior managers in under a year. And when Craig offered it to me, there was a flicker in his eyes, like he expected me to flinch. I didn't. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The stakes? A complete overhaul of our company's global supply chain. 5 years, 6 countries, $32 million in contracts on the line. It wasn't just a project, it was a legacy, the kind that breaks people, or defines them forever. And I wasn't afraid of the work. I was afraid of wasting my potential. I was Zoe Carter, senior operations strategist. I'd spent the last 8 years designing systems, fixing bottlenecks, building relationships no one noticed until things broke. I didn't scream for credit. I let the results speak. But deep down, I wanted more than just being reliable. I wanted to build something no one else could. The first few weeks were a blur of chaos. Vendor issues in Vietnam, regulatory delays in Germany, warehouse closures in Texas. But I thrived in chaos. While others saw fires, I saw puzzle pieces. I mapped out new transportation corridors between Manila and Long Beach. I rebuilt the compliance calendar from scratch. I convinced 2 reluctant stakeholders to align on a unified freight strategy without a single escalation. Every spreadsheet, every Zoom call at 3 a.m., every exhausted Sunday night. Gee, it didn't wear me down. It made me sharper. People started to notice, not just internally. Our clients began requesting me by name. Suppliers said things ran smoother when Zoe was involved. I heard Craig tell someone in the hallway, "She's a machine when she's in the zone." But I wasn't a machine. I was a woman who finally saw her shot and refused to blink. This wasn't just about metrics and milestones. It was about finally doing something that mattered and proving, quietly but undeniably, that I didn't need a louder voice. I just needed the right challenge. And for the first time in my career, I felt like I was building something with my name etched into its foundation. Little did I know. They were already sharpening the knife. I stopped counting the late nights around week 6. At first, it was just a few extra hours here and there, tying up budgets, adjusting timelines, patching over vendor misfires. Then it became every night. The lights in the parking garage would flicker off one row at a time while I sat alone in the war room, eyes glued to freight invoices and customs declarations. My phone buzzed with Slack messages from opposite time zones. Manila, Berlin, Dallas. I answered them all. There were no pats on the back, no "great job" emails. But I didn't mind, not at first. This project was different. I believed in it. I believed that if I gave everything, every hour, every ounce of focus, someone would notice, not out of pity, out of recognition, out of understanding that I was holding something massive together with nothing but sheer will and spreadsheets. People around me began tapping out, one by one. Jenna took stress leave. Tomas got reassigned. Even my intern quit mid-cycle. I kept going, not because I was stronger, but because walking away would have felt like dropping my own name. Some mornings, I'd catch my reflection in the mirrored elevator doors, hair pulled back, coffee in hand, bags under my eyes, and whisper, "One more week, just one more week to stabilize Germany," or, "Once the LA port issues clear, I'll breathe." But the breathing never came. I missed my sister's birthday dinner. Twice, I fell asleep on a Zoom call. Once, I got sick and kept working through it. Always. Craig barely said a word to me. He forwarded documents. That was our language. Every now and then, I'd overhear him talking about the team holding up well. There was no mention of names, just the team. Still, I held on, because beneath the exhaustion, something stubborn stayed lit inside me. A voice that whispered, "Maybe next month they'll see it. Maybe after this phase." Hope is funny like that. It clings to the frayed edges of logic and dares you to believe one more time. So I kept showing up. I kept fixing things before they broke. I kept making others look good without ever needing to shine. Some call it loyalty. Some call it foolishness. I called it investing in the long game. But what I didn't realize was that someone else was already counting the wins without counting me. It was a Thursday morning when the email hit. Subject: Final Board Approval. Global Ops Redesign Initiative. I stared at the subject line for a full 10 seconds, not daring to click. My hands hovered over the mouse like I was defusing a bomb. Then I opened it, and there it was. The green light. Official. Unanimous. The board had signed off. After 7 months of building, negotiating, sweating through midnight vendor calls and back-to-back compliance audits, it was done. I stood there, frozen in my cubicle, heart racing like I'd just crossed a finish line no one else had seen. No confetti, no champagne, just the steady hum of office chatter around me, while something monumental shifted inside me. The project was no longer hypothetical, no longer pending. It was real. I had taken it from idea to implementation. Me, Zoe Carter, for a moment. I just closed my eyes and let it settle into my chest like warmth from the first sun after a long winter. Craig walked by my desk half an hour later, holding his usual iced coffee. He didn't stop, just said, "Looks like it's a go," and kept walking. That was it. But I didn't need a parade. Not yet. There was a meeting scheduled the next day. Leadership Ops Review. It wasn't marked as private. My name was on the attendee list. And deep down, I knew what that meant. This was the kind of win that moved people up. We'd brought in projected savings of $14.6 million over 5 years. 3 major vendors had shifted exclusive partnerships to us. Our solution had been featured in a niche industry journal just last week. I had made sure Craig had all the talking points. I'd polished the decks, triple-checked the numbers. I wasn't walking into that room tomorrow as a background operator anymore. I ironed my best blazer that night. The navy one, not flashy, but sharp, clean lines, structured shoulders. It made me feel like I belonged in boardrooms, like I wasn't just managing work. I was leading it. I rehearsed what I might say if asked to speak. I didn't want to sound too eager, but I wanted them to know I was ready, not just for the next milestone, but for the next role. Because surely, after this, they'd see me, really see me, and even if no one else said it out loud, I did, quietly, as I turned off my desk lamp and headed for the elevator. You earned this! What I didn't know was that by this time tomorrow, they'd already chosen someone else. The meeting invite hit my inbox at 7:46 a.m. Subject: check-in, just you and me. From Craig Morrison. Time: 11:30 a.m. Location: Conference Room 4B. There was no agenda, no prep doc, just a note at the bottom. Let's catch up before things scale. I assumed it was about expansion, next steps, maybe even a performance review. Finally! My heart fluttered, just for a moment. Maybe this was it. At 11:27, I walked into 4B with a notepad, my updated roadmap printed in color, and a quiet but ready smile. Craig was already seated. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, it wasn't the expression I expected. No pride, no excitement, just something unreadable. He cleared his throat. Zoe, we've been watching how hard you've been pushing yourself. I blinked. Pushing myself? Craig nodded slowly, like he was easing into a difficult truth. We've seen the hours, the late nights, and frankly, we're a little concerned. This level of intensity, it's not sustainable. I waited for the punchline. Your well-being matters, he continued. We think it's time for you to step back. Take a breath. 2 weeks, fully paid, mandatory rest. It's not disciplinary, just a pause, for your own good. I couldn't speak. And while you're resting, he added, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, Rachel will be stepping in to ensure continuity. You've built a strong framework. We just need to carry it forward now. Rachel, the manager who'd never sat through a full vendor negotiation, the one who still confused customs codes with currency codes. I stared at Craig, willing myself not to react. I'm not burned out, I said quietly. He offered a sympathetic smile, like I'd just proven his point. Exactly. That's how burnout works. You don't always feel it coming. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from angers, from shame, the kind that swells when someone dresses humiliation in the language of kindness. I was being sidelined, neatly, softly, surgically. I nodded once. Okay. Good, he said, already reaching for his next file. I walked out without looking back, past the break room where I'd spent late nights alone, past the hallway where I once mapped the global rollout on a whiteboard no one else used, past people who didn't meet my eyes. In less than 20 minutes, I'd gone from lead strategist to a cautionary tale. And I still had the roadmaps in my hand. What they didn't realize was, I had built more than just a project. I had built control. And when it crumbled, they'd look everywhere but at the person they told to just rest. I logged into the system that night out of habit. It was 10:43 p.m. I wasn't even supposed to be working. I was on mandatory rest, remember? But I wanted to make sure the vendor routing updates I'd drafted had gone through. Just one last look. The screen blinked. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. I moved to the shared drive. The folders I built, ZC Global Ops, APAC/rollout, Freight Triangulation, they were gone. Or maybe they were still there. Just not for me. Next, I checked my company email. Blank, no messages, no calendar invites, no signature block, just a generic inbox like it had been wiped for a new hire. My name was gone from the project dashboard. I wasn't even marked out of office. I simply wasn't there. And no one had told me. No notice, no call, not even a polite, HR-crafted transition message. I had been erased. Surgically. Quietly. Cleanly. At first, I sat motionless, staring at the screen like it had insulted me. Then I laughed. Once. Softly. The kind of laugh that rises when there's nothing left to hold on to. I thought of all the hours I'd stayed late while the others went home, all the birthdays I'd missed, the migraines I'd worked through, the times I'd said, "No worries, I'll handle it," just so someone else could go home early. All of it, now reduced to an invisible footprint in a system I no longer had access to. No one said thank you. No one even said goodbye. I used to believe hard work meant something. That staying late would earn you more than silence. Turns out, I wasn't part of the picture. I was just convenient. Until I wasn't. I'd spent years trying to prove myself in quiet ways, letting the results speak, letting others shine, thinking that eventually, someone would look past the noise and say, "Her. She's the one holding this together." But no one ever said it, because they never needed to. I wasn't the story. I was the scaffolding. And now that the structure looked finished, they tore me down and swept the dust away without ceremony. The ache in my chest wasn't anger. It was recognition. I finally saw things clearly. This was never about effort. It was about visibility. And I had made the fatal mistake of thinking I could stay behind the scenes and still be protected. They had my frameworks, my forecasts, my plans. But they forgot one thing. I built the project. I also built the guardrails. And I remembered a clause, one they didn't even know I had written, buried deep in the onboarding protocol, a clause that required final handoff approval from the original lead, me. If that handoff didn't happen within 14 days, the contract would auto-expire. They hadn't asked for my sign-off. They hadn't even known they needed it. And now, they were about to find out what happened when the foundation they stood on quietly disappeared. I didn't panic. That surprised me most. No shouting, no revenge fantasy, no frantic text to anyone still inside. I just sat there in my apartment, the glow of my locked-out screen humming back at me, and I took a slow breath, one, then another, because I wasn't powerless. They thought removing my name from the project would be clean. They thought they could replace me like a broken part in a machine. What they forgot, what no one ever really saw, was that I built the machine, and I built it with guardrails. Months ago, in the blur of compliance meetings and contract negotiations, I'd written a line into our client onboarding protocol. It was small, boring, even, something legal had glanced at and waved through because it sounded standard. But it wasn't. The clause was simple. Final handoff of any multi-year, cross-regional account must be approved in writing by the project's originating lead strategist. Failure to secure approval within 14 calendar days of client acceptance renders the agreement voidable at the client's discretion. I remember drafting that line at 2 a.m., somewhere between freight escalation reports and port capacity forecasts. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was trying to protect the work, my work, from being hijacked by someone who hadn't earned it. Now, that clause was my calm center in the middle of their storm. Craig hadn't asked for my sign-off. No one had. Rachel probably didn't even know such a clause existed. She never looked that far down in the protocol documentation. She skimmed the summaries, if she read them at all, and the clock was ticking. I pulled up the protocol version from my personal archive, fully time-stamped, legally backed, approved. I sent one email, not to Craig, not to HR, to the client's legal team. Polite, professional, direct. Just a reminder to confirm that project handoff documentation has been completed in accordance with Clause 12C. If the original strategist's sign-off has not been secured by day 14, we recommend reviewing the agreement's current validity. That was it. No threats, no emotions. I didn't need drama. I had structure. I had leverage. And most of all, I had time. 8 days left on the countdown. They could still fix it, technically. But to do that, they'd have to call me, acknowledge me, admit that I was more than just a name they deleted. I closed the laptop slowly, poured myself a glass of water, and sat by the window as the city lights blinked below. I didn't feel rage. I felt ready. The next move was theirs. The email landed at 2:17 a.m. Not with a bang, just a soft ping in a forgotten inbox. The kind people check without urgency. But this one was different. Subject: immediate termination of agreement. Clause 12C breach. I was asleep when it came in. But at 6:08, coffee in hand and mind already anticipating another day of forced stillness, I opened my inbox out of habit. My breath caught the moment I saw the sender. Clients at Valkoriental, Occam. I clicked. And then I smiled. The message was crisp and formal, clearly drafted by someone who didn't waste words. It referenced Clause 12C, quoted it verbatim, then stated the obvious. No documented approval from the original lead strategist had been submitted within the 14-day window. As a result, Valcor International had elected to void the entire agreement, effective immediately. I read it 3 times. Not because I needed clarity. I wanted to savor it. They hadn't looped in Craig. Not yet. The message went directly to legal, to operations, and, bless their meticulous habits, to me. My name still lingered in some automated alert system, a remnant no one had scrubbed clean. I imagined the moment it would hit Craig's inbox. His eyes narrowing, his voice rising, his half-formed questions. Then Rachel, fumbling for words she didn't understand. Then Dana from finance, realizing the projected Q3 revenue spike had just evaporated. And all of it, so quiet. There were no sirens, no alarms. Just an early morning ripple. This isn't revenge, I thought. This is accountability, delivered in silence. For a brief moment, I pictured Felix, the junior analyst I used to mentor. He always asked the hard questions during budget meetings, the kind that made others roll their eyes. Zoe, he once whispered, do you ever feel like you're the only one doing the actual work here? I had smiled then. But now, that question echoed like prophecy. They didn't just delete my name. They deleted their lifeline. I imagined Felix seeing the email. He'd understand. He'd know this wasn't some act of retaliation. It was structure doing what structure does when handled carelessly. Collapse. I reread the final line again. All integration, implementation, and partner transition efforts are to cease pending renegotiation. Cease. Not pause. Not reconsider. Cease. They thought I'd rest. Instead, I waited. And now, everything they tried to carry forward without me was falling apart under its own weight. I closed my laptop slowly, the edges of a smile still resting in the corners of my mouth. No rage, no noise, just a quiet truth. You don't need to raise your voice when your silence is already echoing through their walls. By 7:12 a.m., the office was already vibrating with unease. It started with a calendar alert being canceled, vendor alignment check-in, canceled. Then came a flood of red flag emails from Valcor's integration team, one by one. Status threads were halted. External logins revoked. Shipment forecasts withdrawn. Craig's name appeared in a flurry of email chains marked urgent, contract voided. Rachel hadn't even made it through her first coffee when she was summoned to the 14th floor conference room. Dana from finance was already there, pale and tight-lipped. It joined the call 15 minutes later, followed by legal. By 8:03 a.m., panic had a shape, and it was shaped like Clause 12C. Craig was unreachable for 27 minutes. When he finally stormed into the conference room, half-buttoned and clearly unshaven, the silence hit him like a wall. Rachel tried to speak first. I didn't even see that clause. You didn't see it? Dana snapped. You were the one who signed the revised onboarding protocol. But I didn't draft it, Rachel cried, voice cracking. Zoe wrote all that back-end documentation. No one even asked me to check it. Dana turned to Craig. This is a $32 million failure. Gone. Overnight. What do you have to say? Craig ran a hand over his face. We can renegotiate. It's not over. No, Craig, said Jeremy, the senior legal counsel, who had joined by phone. Valcor's message was clear. The agreement is void. Their board doesn't want to renegotiate. You ignored their terms. The room went dead quiet. Across the office floor, junior analysts whispered in corners. Slack channels filled with cryptic emojis and clipped updates. They're in the war room. Rachel's crying. Valcor pulled everything. In procurement, Carla was already fielding calls from vendors whose contracts were contingent on the Valcor rollout. One replied, "No Valcor, no bulk discount. Prepare for requote." By 9:30, the company's internal systems were visibly slowing down. Shared drives showed error messages. Approval queues clogged with unresolved routing. Someone in IT whispered that Zoe's archived permissions had triggered an internal compliance lock when her sign-off wasn't recorded properly. Entire workflows had collapsed behind that one unchecked box. At 10:11 a.m., an emergency board meeting was called. Craig wasn't invited. Neither was Rachel. Inside the room, the remaining leadership team stared at projections blinking red across a 70-inch screen. There was no way to spin it. No one to blame publicly without exposing the truth. The company had tried to erase the one person who built everything, and had failed to notice she held the key. Outside that room, Craig sat in his office, phone on silent, staring at a contract folder with Zoe's initials still on the original draft. Rachel was nowhere to be seen. And Zoe? Zoe hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. The company was crumbling not because she pushed back, but because no one else knew how to hold it up. By noon the next day, the office was silent, at least from my side. No one called. No one emailed. No one even sent a text asking, "Hey, what happened?" It wasn't that they didn't have questions. It was that they didn't know how to ask them anymore. The company was unraveling by the minute. Vendors were backing out. Internal teams were stalled, and I was still sitting in my apartment, sipping tea like it was just another afternoon. Felix, the junior analyst, finally sent a Slack message. I didn't say anything, but I saw it coming. Thank you for how you handled things. Quiet, precise. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. I didn't reply. I just reacted with a emoji. That was all that needed to be said. By now, the company knew exactly what had happened. Clause 12C had done its job. The same systems they once praised me for building had quietly closed behind them like a vault door. And I'd never raised my voice, never leaked a thing, never threatened. That's what scared them the most. Had I screamed, they might have dismissed me as emotional. Had I fought openly, they might have felt justified in their decision to sideline me. But I didn't give them that luxury. I just disappeared and let the weight of my absence do the talking. I pictured Craig sitting in his corner office, blinds down. As the board questioned everything, Rachel probably hadn't shown up at all. It had likely spent hours trying to reverse the damage, only to realize that nothing was broken, just sealed. Not a single person asked me to return. Not a single person apologized. No awkward HR follow-up. No let's chat calendar invite. Because reaching out meant admitting they had made a mistake, and none of them had that kind of courage. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Not for me. It was confirmation. For years, I had been the woman behind the curtain, the fixer, the architect, the problem solver no one invited to the photo ops. They thought I was just operational support. But now they knew. I had been holding the ceiling up the whole time, and the moment they pulled me out, the structure collapsed. I didn't feel smug. I felt centered. There was no need to return, no interest in salvaging something that had treated me like an afterthought. Let them rebuild without me. Let them sit with the lesson. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just leaves the room and takes the stability with it. By evening, I got a LinkedIn message. Not from Craig, not from anyone internal. It was from Valcor International. We'd like to schedule a conversation with you directly. The board has approved a special strategy position for global operations. Full autonomy. Let us know when you're free. I smiled, closed the tab, and leaned back in my chair. The silence I'd left behind was doing more work than 1,000 speeches ever could. 1 week later, I walked into a boardroom that didn't know my past but recognized my value. The walls were glass, the skyline sharp against the morning sun, and at the center of the table sat 3 of Valcor's global strategy leads. Waiting for me, they stood when I entered. No clipboard, no printouts, just a handshake and a statement. "We've reviewed everything. You built what they tried to steal. We want you to build it again, this time, for us." No politics, no layers of red tape, just clarity. They offered a role titled Executive Director of Global Operations Strategy, double my previous salary, autonomy over team selection, direct access to the CEO. It wasn't just a new job. It was an invitation to shape something real, with my name on it this time. I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to think about Craig, or Rachel, or the silence that followed when everything I'd built fell apart behind me. That chapter had closed itself. This was a new beginning. I showed up to my first day at Valcor in a soft charcoal suit. Clean lines, no armor, just confidence. Felix had followed me too. He resigned 3 days after the fallout and asked if I'd consider him for my team. I said yes, not because I owed him, but because he saw me before anyone else did. And that morning, I stood at the head of a new table, new city, new company. But this time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't the underdog. I wasn't the support act. I was the architect, fully credited. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's walking into the future they thought they stole from you, like you owned it all along. They erased me from a system I built, so I built something they could never touch. And this time, I didn't knock. I walked in, and the room stood up.